Undercover CEO notices staff skipping meals to pay bills. Next day he covers tuition for their kids. The industrial dishwasher roared like a jet engine, and Ethan Ward's hands were already pink from the scalding water. His back ached. His feet throbbed. And somewhere under the fake glasses and deliberately messy hair, the CEO of Summit Restaurant Group was beginning to understand what his employees endured every single day. He'd been working undercover for 3 days now, introduced to the staff as Eddie, a middle-aged guy down on his luck who needed work. No one questioned it. In an industry with constant turnover, new faces were normal. Ethan had expected to discover inefficiencies. Maybe spot which managers were slacking. Perhaps identify why customer complaints had doubled in the past 6 months. Standard operational problems that could be fixed with a memo and a training session. He hadn't expected to discover something that would haunt him. The break room was cramped, tucked behind the kitchen like an afterthought. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting everything in a harsh, tired glow. The walls were beige, the kind of color that used to be white but had surrendered to years of grease and neglect. A microwave hummed in the corner next to a coffee maker that looked older than some of the employees. Ethan pushed through the door at 2:47 p.m., right in the middle of the lunch rush lull. His shift supervisor had barked at him to take 15 minutes. And not a second more, Eddie. So here he was, collapsing into a plastic chair that wobbled under his weight. Across the room, Maria Gutierrez sat alone at the small table. She was a line cook, maybe mid-30s, with tired eyes that suggested she'd lived twice that long. Her dark hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her chef's coat was stained with the evidence of a brutal shift, red sauce on the sleeve, a splash of oil near the collar. Ethan had noticed her before. She moved through the kitchen with quiet efficiency, never complaining, never slowing down. The kind of employee every manager loved but rarely truly saw. She had a Tupperware container in front of her. Steam rose from it, something with rice and chicken, simple but home-cooked. The smell made Ethan's stomach growl. He hadn't eaten since breakfast, and that had been a protein bar grabbed on his way out of his penthouse at 5 a.m. Maria stared at the food for a long moment. Then, instead of eating, she reached for a smaller container from her bag. Ethan watched, confused, as she carefully began transferring the rice and chicken from the larger container to the smaller one. Every grain. Every piece of meat. She worked methodically, making sure nothing was wasted, pressing down gently to fit as much as possible. When she was done, she sealed the smaller container and placed it back in her bag. The larger Tupperware, now empty, went back in her lunchbox. She pulled out a bottle of water instead. Unscrewed the cap. Took 3 long swallows. That was her lunch. Water. The door swung open and Marcus, one of the prep cooks, walked in. He was young, maybe 22, with the kind of energy that hadn't been beaten down by years of back-breaking work yet. "Hey, Maria," he said, heading for the vending machine. "Skipping lunch again?" Maria glanced up, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I ate earlier." "No, you didn't." Marcus fed $1 into the machine. "I saw you this morning. You passed on the staff meal. And yesterday too." "I'm fine, Marcus. You're gonna pass out if you keep this up." Maria's smile faded. She looked down at her hands, fingers laced together on the table. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I'll take it home. My kids need it more." The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. Marcus stopped, his hand hovering over the vending machine buttons. "Maria, come on. You gotta eat something. My kids need it more," she repeated, quieter this time. Then she stood, grabbed her bag, and walked out of the break room without looking back. The door swung shut behind her. Marcus stared after her for a moment, then punched B7 on the vending machine. A bag of chips dropped down. He grabbed it, shook his head, and muttered something under his breath that Ethan couldn't quite hear. Ethan sat frozen in his chair, the wobble suddenly the least of his concerns. He'd come here expecting workflow problems. Computer system inefficiencies. Maybe personality conflicts between managers and staff. The usual corporate issues that looked neat and fixable on a spreadsheet. He hadn't expected hunger. Maria was skipping meals to feed her kids. His employee, someone on his payroll, was going without food because she couldn't afford both lunch and dinner for her family. Ethan's chest felt tight. His hands, still damp from dishwater, clenched into fists on his lap. How long had this been happening? Was it just Maria, or were there others? The door opened again. 2 more kitchen staff walked in, Daniel and Sophie. They headed straight for the corner table, both carrying brown paper bags. "Did you bring anything today?" Sophie asked Daniel as they sat down. Daniel shook his head. "Nah. Saving money. Got my daughter's tuition payment due next week. Same. My son's school fees are killing me. I've been doing coffee for breakfast, and that's it until dinner. Better than nothing, I guess." Sophie laughed, but it was bitter. "Yeah. Education costs more than food now, doesn't it?" Daniel didn't laugh. He just nodded, staring at the table. "Sometimes I wonder if it's even worth it. I'm working myself to death so he can go to a school that's gonna teach him to look down on people like me." "Don't say that. You're giving him a chance. That's what matters." "A chance to what? Be as broke as I am, just with a diploma?" Ethan felt like the walls were closing in. This wasn't one person struggling. This was multiple employees, people he was responsible for, sacrificing basic needs to pay for their children's education. And he'd had no idea. His executive team held weekly meetings. They discussed profit margins, customer satisfaction scores, menu innovations, expansion plans. They analyzed data, reviewed reports, celebrated wins. But nobody had mentioned this. Nobody had told him that his people were starving. The 15-minute break ended too quickly. Ethan returned to the dish pit in a daze, his hands moving on autopilot as he scrubbed plates and loaded trays. But his mind was somewhere else entirely. He kept seeing Maria's face. The way she'd carefully transferred every grain of rice into that smaller container. The quiet resignation in her voice. "My kids need it more." By the time his shift ended at 10 p.m., Ethan's entire body ached. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the weight pressing down on his chest. He'd built Summit Restaurant Group from the ground up. 12 locations across 3 states. Over 300 employees. Revenue in the tens of millions. He'd thought he was creating opportunities. Jobs. Stability. Instead, he'd created a system where parents skipped meals to afford school tuition. As Ethan walked to his car, a beat-up Honda he'd borrowed from a friend for this undercover operation, he made a decision. This wasn't just about operational improvements anymore. This was about something much bigger. And he was going to fix it. But first, he needed to understand exactly how deep this problem went. Ethan's shift the next day started at 4 p.m. He arrived early, parking the borrowed Honda 3 blocks away and walking to the restaurant in the fading afternoon light. The closer he got, the heavier his steps felt. He couldn't stop thinking about Maria. About Daniel and Sophie. About how many more employees were silently drowning while he sat in boardroom meetings celebrating quarterly profits. The kitchen was already heating up when he clocked in. Friday nights were brutal. The restaurant would be packed until midnight, maybe later. Ethan tied on his apron and stepped into the chaos of clanging pots, shouting cooks, and the perpetual roar of industrial appliances. His station was next to the main cooking line, which meant he heard everything. For the first few hours, it was the usual kitchen banter. Jokes about a sports game. Someone complaining about a rude customer. The sous chef yelling at a new hire who'd overcooked salmon. But then, around 7 p.m., things shifted. The dinner rush was at its peak. Orders flew in faster than the kitchen could keep up. Ethan was loading his third rack of dishes when he heard voices behind him. 2 cooks huddled near the walk-in freezer, speaking in low tones. He recognized them, James and Patricia, both in their 40s, both veterans of the kitchen. "I'm not eating breakfast anymore," James said quietly. "Just coffee. Trying to make the paycheck stretch until the 15th. Patricia nodded, her face grim. Same. I've got 2 weeks to come up with $1,200 for my daughter's tuition or she's out. The school already sent a warning letter. 1,200? Jesus. Mine's 800, but I've also got to pay rent. I don't know how I'm supposed to do both. You can't. That's the problem. James leaned against the wall, exhaustion written across his features. My wife took a second job cleaning offices at night. Between both our incomes, we're still short. I thought about asking for a raise, but you know how that goes. They'll tell you to be grateful you have a job at all. Exactly. Patricia glanced toward the kitchen manager's office, making sure no one was listening. Last month I skipped my blood pressure medication to afford the school fees. Now I'm dizzy half my shift, but what choice do I have? If my son gets expelled, that's his future gone. My health can wait. Ethan's hand stopped moving. Water dripped from the plate he was holding back into the sink. She'd skipped medication. Life-saving medication. For school fees. Education costs more than food now, James said with a bitter laugh. Hell, it costs more than healthcare apparently. We're sacrificing everything for our kids to have a chance, and I'm not even sure it matters anymore. The world's so expensive, even with an education they'll probably end up like us, broke and exhausted. Don't say that. Why not? It's true. They fell silent for a moment. Then James pushed off the wall. Come on. We've got orders backing up. Can't afford to get fired on top of everything else. They returned to their stations, and Ethan stood frozen at the dish pit, water running over his hands. This wasn't just Maria. This wasn't just Daniel and Sophie. This was systemic. Multiple employees, good people who showed up every day and worked themselves to exhaustion, were making impossible choices between basic necessities and their children's futures. And the worst part? They didn't even feel like they could ask for help. The rest of the shift passed in a blur. Ethan moved mechanically, scrubbing dishes while his mind raced. Every conversation he overheard now felt loaded with hidden meaning. Every tired face in the kitchen suddenly looked different. How many of them were hungry right now? How many had skipped meals today, yesterday, all week? At 10:30 p.m., the kitchen finally started to slow down. The last orders went out. Staff began cleaning their stations, the ritual of closing that Ethan had participated in dozens of times now without truly understanding what came after. He was wiping down the dish pit when he heard Marcus talking to another prep cook near the back door. I'm so tired I can't even see straight, Marcus said. But I've got to go home and study. Got a tuition deadline Monday and I'm still 200 short. Can't your parents help? Marcus laughed. Man, they're the reason I'm working here. Trying to pay them back for raising me. My dad's been sick, medical bills are insane. I take care of my tuition, he can focus on not dying. That's the deal. The other cook didn't respond. What could he say? Ethan clocked out at 11 p.m. and sat in the borrowed Honda for 20 minutes before starting the engine. His reflection in the rearview mirror looked like a stranger, fake glasses, messy hair, exhaustion carved into every line of his face. But the exhaustion wasn't from washing dishes. It was from the crushing realization of what he'd built. He'd created jobs, yes. Paychecks, yes. But he hadn't created stability. He hadn't created security. He'd created a system where hardworking people had to choose between eating lunch and paying for their children's education. Where parents skipped medication to afford school fees. Where exhaustion was currency and hope was a luxury. His corporate leadership team, his COO, his CFO, his VP of operations, they all reported metrics. Labor costs. Food costs. Profit margins. Customer satisfaction scores. But nobody had reported this. Nobody had told him his employees were suffering. Or maybe they had, and he'd been too far removed to hear it. Ethan started the car and drove toward his penthouse, the gleaming downtown skyline a stark contrast to the worn-down neighborhood he was leaving behind. Tomorrow he'd go into the corporate office. He'd dig through the numbers himself. And he'd find out exactly how bad this really was. Saturday morning, 6 a.m. The corporate office was empty, exactly as Ethan had planned. He sat alone in the dim conference room on the 14th floor, surrounded by stacks of printed payroll reports, financial statements, and employee files that he'd pulled from the HR database. His laptop glowed in the darkness, casting blue light across papers covered in yellow highlighter marks. The building's silence felt oppressive. On Monday, this space would buzz with energy, phones ringing, meetings happening, the comfortable hum of a successful business operation. But right now, in the pre-dawn quiet, that success felt like a lie. Ethan had barely slept. After leaving the restaurant last night, he'd gone home, showered, and immediately started accessing company records remotely. What he'd found had kept him up until 3 a.m., and driven him to come into the office to see the physical files himself. He needed to understand the full scope of what was happening. His coffee had gone cold an hour ago. He didn't care. The first report sat in front of him: emergency paycheck advance requests, last 90 days. Ethan had known the company offered this benefit. It was designed as a safety net. Employees could request up to 50% of their earned wages early in cases of genuine emergency. Medical bills, car repairs, unexpected family crises. He'd approved the policy 3 years ago, proud of himself for offering something most restaurant chains didn't provide. What he hadn't known was how many people were using it. Or why. The spreadsheet showed 127 requests in the last 3 months alone. That was nearly 40% of their total workforce across all locations. But it was the reason column that made Ethan's stomach turn. School tuition, overdue notice. Child's school fees, risk of expulsion. Educational expenses, final warning. Tuition payment, deadline this week. Row after row after row. The words blurred together, but the message was crystal clear. His employees weren't requesting emergency advances for unexpected crises. They were requesting them for predictable, recurring expenses they simply couldn't afford. Education costs that came every semester, like clockwork, and still caught them unprepared because there was no money left after rent, food, utilities, and medical bills. Ethan rubbed his eyes. The fake glasses he'd worn for his undercover work sat on the table next to him, a reminder of the performance he'd been giving. But there was no performance now. Just him, alone with the truth he'd been too blind to see. He pulled up another file, individual employee financial records. His HR director would probably have a heart attack if she knew he was accessing these. Privacy concerns, liability issues, all the corporate protocols designed to protect the company. But Ethan didn't care about protocols right now. He searched for Maria Gutierrez. Her file opened, and Ethan felt his chest tighten. Maria Gutierrez, line cook, 7 years employment. Current hourly wage, $1,650. Dependents, 2 children, ages 8 and 11. Emergency advance requests this year, 6 times. In less than a year, Maria had needed to request early payment of wages she'd already earned just to stay afloat. He scrolled down to her recent activity. Most recent advance request, $430. Reason, school tuition overdue, 30-day expulsion warning. Status, approved. Notes, second overdue notice this semester. Both children attending St. Augustine Elementary. Combined tuition $850 per month. Ethan did the math in his head. Maria made roughly $2,800 a month before taxes. After taxes, maybe $2,200. Rent in this city averaged $1,200 for a small apartment. Add utilities, food, transportation, basic necessities. There was nothing left. Literally nothing. And St. Augustine's tuition was $850 a month for both kids. The numbers didn't work. They couldn't work. Maria was performing an impossible equation where the answer would always be negative. She was drowning, and the company, his company, had just been watching it happen. Ethan clicked to the next file. Then the next. Then the next. James Patterson, 3 emergency advances. 2 kids. Tuition at Roosevelt Middle School. Patricia Coleman, 4 emergency advances. 1 child. Medical bills and tuition payments. Daniel Reeves, 5 emergency advances. Daughter in private school because the public school in his neighborhood was failing. Marcus Chin, 2 emergency advances. College tuition. Working full-time while taking night classes. The pattern was everywhere. Undeniable. Damning. Ethan stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows. The sun was starting to rise over the city, painting the skyline in shades of gold and pink. Beautiful. Inspiring. The view from this office had always made him feel accomplished. Now it just felt obscene. He turned back to the table and pulled up the company's quarterly financial report, the one he'd presented to the board of directors just 2 weeks ago. Q3 profits, $42 million. Year-over-year growth, 18%. Expansion plans, 3 new locations approved. $4 million in profit. While Maria skipped lunch to feed her kids. While James and his wife worked 2 jobs and still couldn't make ends meet. While Patricia skipped her blood pressure medication to afford school fees. Ethan felt rage building in his chest, not at his employees, but at himself. At his executive team. At the system they'd all participated in without questioning. His COO had never mentioned this in their weekly meetings. His CFO had certainly seen these payroll reports. Emergency advances affected cash flow, after all. His VP of operations walked through those restaurants regularly. Had they not noticed? Or had they not cared? Or worse, had they noticed and decided it wasn't important enough to bring to his attention because the profits were good? Ethan picked up his phone and opened his email. He typed a message to his executive team. Emergency meeting. Monday, 7 a.m. Non-negotiable. Come prepared to explain why nobody told me our employees are starving. He hit send before he could second-guess the tone. Then he sat back down and pulled Maria's file closer. 30-day expulsion warning. That meant her kids had less than a month before they'd be kicked out of school. Not if he could help it. But first, he needed to go back undercover one more time. He needed to try something, see if there was a way to help without revealing himself yet. He needed to understand if they'd even accept help. Or if they were too afraid to trust anything that came from corporate. Monday morning, Ethan arrived at the restaurant at 5 a.m., 2 hours before his shift. The parking lot was empty except for a delivery truck unloading produce at the back entrance. Perfect. He'd spent all of Sunday planning this. After discovering the full scope of the financial crisis his employees faced, he couldn't just sit and wait for corporate meetings. He needed to do something now. In his trunk sat 30 preloaded grocery gift cards, each worth $200. He'd bought them Sunday afternoon from 5 different stores to avoid suspicion, paying cash, keeping them anonymous. $6,000 total. A drop in the bucket compared to the company's quarterly profits, but enough to give his struggling employees some immediate relief. Or so he thought. Ethan slipped through the back door. The morning manager had already unlocked it for deliveries, and headed straight for the employee locker room. His heart pounded as he moved quickly through the dim hallway. The locker room was basic. 2 rows of metal lockers, a wooden bench down the middle, a bulletin board covered in OSHA posters and the schedule for next week. It smelled like industrial cleaner and old gym socks. Most employees didn't use locks. Budget constraints meant most lockers just had a simple latch. Ethan felt like a criminal as he opened the first locker, Maria's. He checked the name tag that morning. He slipped a gift card inside, tucked it into her jacket pocket where she'd find it easily. No note. No explanation. Just help. He moved to the next locker. James. Another card. Then Patricia. Then Daniel. Then Marcus. One by one, he placed gift cards in the lockers of every employee he'd identified from the payroll reports. His hands shook slightly as he worked, glancing over his shoulder every few seconds to make sure no one was coming. By 5:40 a.m., he was done. 30 gift cards distributed. Anonymous help delivered. Ethan slipped back out to his car and sat there until 6:45, when his shift actually started. He tried to imagine their reactions when they discovered the cards. Relief. Gratitude. Maybe tears of joy. Maybe Maria could finally eat lunch today instead of giving it all to her kids. The thought made him smile for the first time since this whole undercover operation had started. He had no idea how wrong he was. The shift started normally. Ethan clocked in, tied his apron, and took his position at the dish pit. The morning crew filtered in: prep cooks, line cooks, the manager who barely acknowledged anyone before disappearing into his office. Around 8 a.m., he heard the first raised voice from the locker room. "What the hell is this?" Then another voice. "You got one too?" Ethan's pulse quickened. They'd found the cards. But the tone wasn't gratitude. It was panic. Maria emerged from the locker room first, her face pale, the gift card clutched in her hand like evidence at a crime scene. She walked straight to the kitchen manager's office. "Tom, I need to talk to you." The manager looked up from his computer, annoyed. "Maria, we open in 30 minutes. Can it wait?" "No. Someone put this in my locker." She held up the card. "I didn't take it. I don't know who put it there. I'm not stealing." Tom's expression shifted from annoyance to confusion. "What are you talking about?" By now, other employees had gathered. James held up his card. "I got one too. $200. Just sitting in my locker." "Me too," Patricia said, her voice tight with fear. "Someone's messing with us." Tom stood up, and Ethan, still at the dish pit but able to hear everything, felt his stomach drop. This wasn't going how he'd planned. Not at all. "Everyone who found a card, meet in the break room now," Tom announced. "Eddie, you too." Everyone. Ethan's mouth went dry, but he had no choice. He followed the group into the cramped break room where nearly 20 employees crowded together, all holding identical gift cards. The energy in the room wasn't relief or joy. It was fear. "This is a setup," James said, pacing near the window. "Corporate is testing us. They want to see who takes the money so they can fire us for theft." "That's paranoid," someone countered, but their voice lacked conviction. "Is it?" Patricia crossed her arms. "My cousin worked at a warehouse where they did exactly this. Left cash in random spots, then fired everyone who pocketed it for dishonesty. This is the same thing." Maria shook her head, staring at the card in her hand. "But it was in my locker. In my jacket. How is that theft if someone put it there?" "Doesn't matter. They'll twist it however they want." James turned to the group, his face grim. "Listen to me, corporate is watching us. If they know we're struggling, they'll replace us with people who don't need help. That's how these companies work. We're liabilities now," Daniel added quietly. "They probably think if we're desperate for money, we might steal from the register or skim ingredients. Easier to just get rid of us." Ethan wanted to scream. He wanted to stand up and tell them the truth, that he was trying to help, not trap them. That this was compassion, not surveillance. But he couldn't. Not yet. Not like this. Tom held up his hands. "Okay, everyone calm down. I'll call corporate HR and figure out what's going on. In the meantime, don't touch the cards. Leave them in your lockers. If this is some kind of investigation, we don't want anyone getting in trouble." The group dispersed slowly, everyone looking over their shoulders like they were being watched. Which, in a way, they were. Maria stopped near Ethan on her way out. She looked exhausted. Defeated. "I really needed that money," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "But I can't risk my job. My kids need me employed more than they need $200. She walked away, and Ethan stood frozen in the break room doorway. His attempt to help had made everything worse. They didn't trust the company. They couldn't trust the company. Years of corporate indifference had taught them that kindness was always a trap. And he just confirmed their worst fears. Ethan returned to the dish pit, his hands moving automatically while his mind raced. Secrecy wasn't working. Anonymous help wasn't working. If he wanted to actually change their lives, he needed to do something bigger. Something public. Something undeniable. And he needed to stop hiding. The lunch rush hit like a tidal wave. Orders flooded in faster than the kitchen could manage, and the temperature climbed to what felt like 100 degrees. Ethan's shirt was soaked through with sweat and dishwater, his hands raw from the constant cycle of scrubbing, rinsing, loading. But the physical discomfort barely registered. His mind was still in that break room, watching his employees reject help because they'd learned that trust was dangerous. He'd created that culture. Maybe not intentionally, but his distance from their reality had allowed it to grow unchecked. Around 2 p.m., the pace finally started to slow. The lunch crowd thinned, and the kitchen staff moved into that brief window of calm before the dinner prep began in earnest. Ethan was loading the last rack of lunch dishes when he heard a crash behind him. He spun around in time to see Maria stumbling, her hand reaching out to grab the prep counter but missing. She hit the floor hard, her body crumpling like someone had cut her strings. "Maria!" Patricia rushed over, dropping the knife she'd been using. "Someone get water!" Ethan abandoned his station and ran to where Maria lay on the tile floor, her eyes half closed, her breathing shallow. Her chef's coat was drenched in sweat, and her skin looked gray in the harsh kitchen lighting. "Maria, can you hear me?" Patricia patted her cheek gently. "Stay with us." Tom pushed through the gathering crowd. "What happened?" "She just collapsed." "Call 911 . "No," Maria's voice was weak but insistent. Her eyes fluttered open. "No ambulance." "I can't afford it." "Maria, you passed out." I said no. She tried to sit up and immediately swayed. Just give me a minute." Ethan grabbed a clean bar towel and ran it under cold water. He knelt beside her and pressed it to her forehead. "Easy. Don't move too fast." Maria's eyes focused on him, on Eddie, the dishwasher she barely knew. "I'm fine. Just got dizzy." "When's the last time you ate something?" Patricia asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Maria didn't respond. "That's what I thought." Patricia stood up. "Tom, she needs to go home. I'll cover her station." "Fine. But Maria, you're not working tomorrow until you've actually eaten a meal." "I mean it." The crowd dispersed, returning to their stations with worried glances over their shoulders. Tom disappeared back into his office. Patricia squeezed Maria's shoulder once before heading back to the line, which left Ethan alone with her. He helped her sit up slowly, then guided her to the nearby prep table where she could lean against it. He handed her a bottle of water from the storage shelf, and she took it with shaking hands. "Thank you, Eddie." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "You need to eat something." Ethan kept his voice gentle, stripping away the CO authority he usually carried. Right now, he was just a co-worker. Someone who cared. "There's leftover soup from lunch service. Let me get you some." "I'm okay." "Really? You're not okay. You just collapsed." Maria took a long drink of water, then another. Color was slowly returning to her face, but she still looked fragile. Breakable. "I just need a minute," she repeated, but there was no conviction behind it. Ethan sat down on an overturned milk crate beside her. He didn't say anything for a moment, just let the silence settle. The kitchen hummed around them, the sound of prep work, distant conversation, the ever-present drone of refrigeration units. "This job used to be enough," Maria said suddenly. Her eyes were fixed on the water bottle in her hands. "When I started here 7 years ago, I could pay my bills and still have enough left for groceries. Maybe not much extra, but enough. It was okay." Ethan listened, his chest tight. "But everything got expensive. Rent went up twice. Food costs more. Gas is insane. And the school," she trailed off, shaking her head. "The school keeps raising tuition. Every semester it's another $50 per kid. Another fee for this. Another charge for that. I'm drowning and nobody cares because that's just how it is now. Your kids are lucky to have you fighting for them." Maria laughed, but it was hollow. "Fighting? I'm failing. I used to dream about my kids becoming doctors or engineers. Smart careers, stable careers. Now I just hope they don't get kicked out of school before they can graduate elementary. The words cut through Ethan like a blade. I'm 36 years old. Maria continued, her voice cracking slightly. I work 50 hours a week. I skip meals. I haven't bought new clothes in 2 years. I cut my own hair in the bathroom mirror. I do everything right, everything they tell you to do, show up, work hard, don't complain. And it's still not enough. A tear slid down her cheek. She wiped it away quickly, embarrassed. My daughter asked me last week why we never have food in the house like her friends do. She's 8. She shouldn't have to notice that. And I had to tell her we're saving money, but she's smart enough to know what that really means. Ethan felt something break inside his chest. He'd spent years building this company, proud of the empire he'd created. He'd given speeches about opportunity and growth. He'd celebrated profit margins and expansion plans. And the whole time, Maria had been starving. His father's voice echoed in his memory, words spoken on his deathbed 5 years ago. Success isn't about how much money you make, son. It's about how many lives you improve. Build something that matters, Ethan had promised. Standing in that hospital room, holding his father's hand, he'd promised to run a company that changed lives for the better. He'd broken that promise. I should get back to work, Maria said, starting to stand. Wait, Ethan's hand hovered near her arm but didn't touch. Just rest another few minutes. Please. She settled back down, too exhausted to argue. They sat together in silence, and Ethan made a decision. Tomorrow, everything would change. No more hiding. No more anonymous gestures that bred suspicion instead of hope. Tomorrow, he'd reveal himself. And he'd do what he should have done years ago. He'd actually fix this. Eddie? Maria's voice pulled him from his thoughts. Yeah? Thanks for the water. And for, not making me feel stupid. Ethan's throat felt tight. You're not stupid, Maria. You're one of the strongest people I've ever met. She gave him a small, sad smile. Then she stood, steadier now, and walked back toward the kitchen. Ethan watched her go, his resolve hardening into steel. Tomorrow, Maria would never skip another meal to feed her kids. Tomorrow, none of them would. He'd make sure of it. Tuesday morning, 9 a.m. Every employee from the restaurant stood crowded in the main dining room, confused and anxious. The tables had been pushed aside to create an open space, and folding chairs were arranged in rows facing the front where a small podium had been set up. Nobody knew why they'd been called in 2 hours before opening. The night crew. The day crew. Even people who weren't scheduled to work. Tom had sent an urgent message the night before. Mandatory meeting. Everyone must attend. No exceptions. The rumors had started immediately. They're closing the location. Mass layoffs. I knew it. It's about those gift cards. Someone's getting fired. Maria sat in the third row, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She'd barely slept, anxiety gnawing at her all night. She couldn't afford to lose this job. Not now. Not with the tuition deadline 2 weeks away. Beside her, James and Patricia whispered nervously. Across the aisle, Marcus stared at his phone, his leg bouncing with nervous energy. The room fell silent when Tom walked in from the kitchen. But he wasn't alone. Behind him came a man in a tailored navy suit, crisp white shirt, polished shoes that probably cost more than Maria's monthly rent. He was clean-shaven, his hair neatly styled, wearing expensive glasses that actually fit his face properly. Maria's breath caught. There was something familiar about him. The way he walked. The shape of his jaw. But it couldn't be. The man stepped up to the podium, and the room went deathly quiet. Good morning, he said, his voice steady and clear. My name is Ethan Ward. I am the founder and CEO of Summit Restaurant Group. The words hit like a bomb. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone dropped their phone. Maria felt the blood drain from her face. The CEO. Here. In their restaurant. This was worse than she'd thought. When the CEO showed up personally, it meant something catastrophic. Closures. Bankruptcy. Mass terminations. She was going to lose her job. Her kids were going to get expelled. Everything was falling apart. "I know you weren't expecting me," Ethan continued. His eyes swept across the room, and Maria could swear he looked directly at her for a moment. "And I know this is frightening. But I need you to hear what I have to say." The room remained frozen. Waiting. "For the past week, I've been working here. Undercover. As a dishwasher named Eddie." More gasps. Heads turned, people looking at each other with wide eyes. Maria's mind reeled. Eddie. The quiet dishwasher who'd helped her when she collapsed yesterday. Who'd given her water and sat with her and told her she was strong. That was the CEO. She'd confided in the CEO. Told him about her failures as a mother. About her kids potentially getting expelled. Oh God. "I came here expecting to find operational problems," Ethan said. "Workflow issues. Training gaps. The kind of things that show up on spreadsheets and get fixed with better systems." He paused, and Maria saw something in his expression, pain maybe. Regret. "What I found was so much worse. I found good people, hard-working, dedicated people, who are suffering. Who skip meals to feed their children. Who go without medication to pay school tuition. Who work themselves to exhaustion and still can't make ends meet." The room was utterly silent now. You could hear breathing. Heartbeats. I watched Maria pack her lunch into a container to take home instead of eating it, because her kids needed it more. His voice cracked slightly on her name, and Maria felt tears spring to her eyes. "I heard James and Patricia talk about skipping breakfast to afford tuition payments. I learned that Marcus is working full-time while trying to go to school himself, barely surviving on coffee and hope." People were crying now. Not from fear anymore, but from being seen. From having their invisible struggles suddenly acknowledged by someone in power. "I looked at the payroll data," Ethan continued. 40% of you have requested emergency paycheck advances this year. Almost all of them for education expenses. And I asked myself, how did I not know this? How did I build a company where people are making impossible choices between feeding themselves and educating their children? He stepped away from the podium, closer to the assembled employees. The answer is that I failed you. I built a successful business, profitable, expanding, celebrated. But I didn't build what I promised my father I'd build. I didn't create something that actually changed lives for the better. I created jobs that still left you struggling. Paychecks that still weren't enough. Success that was mine, not yours. Ethan's hands gripped the edge of a nearby table. My executive team didn't tell me what was happening. Maybe they didn't know. Maybe they didn't care. Maybe they thought profits mattered more than people. But ultimately, the failure is mine. I should have been here. I should have known. I should have seen you, really seen you, years ago. Maria wiped tears from her cheeks. Around her, people were openly crying now. I can't change the past, Ethan said. But I can change what happens next. Starting today. Starting right now. He straightened, and something shifted in his posture. The guilt was still there, but beneath it was something else. Determination. Purpose. You're not going to struggle anymore. Not if I have anything to say about it. The room held its breath. Yesterday, I tried to help anonymously with gift cards. That failed spectacularly because you've learned correctly that you can't trust corporations. That help always comes with strings attached. That kindness is usually a trap. Several people nodded unconsciously. So I'm not doing this anonymously. I'm doing this publicly, with my name attached, with accountability. Because you deserve to know that this is real. That this isn't a test or a trick. That someone actually gives a damn about whether your kids get to stay in school. Maria's heart was pounding so hard she could barely breathe. Ethan looked directly at her. Maria, yesterday you told me you used to dream about your kids becoming doctors or engineers. You said now you just hope they don't get expelled. She nodded, unable to speak. They're not getting expelled. Neither are anyone else's kids. Because as of today, that's no longer your burden to carry alone. The room erupted in confused murmurs. Let me show you what I mean. Ethan gestured to Tom, who wheeled out a cart with folders stacked on it. These folders contain something new. Something that starts today. He picked up the top folder. Maria Gutierrez. Come here, please. Maria's legs felt like water as she stood. Every eye in the room was on her as she walked toward the front, each step feeling surreal. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. She was being singled out. Made an example of. She told the CEO, when she thought he was just Eddie, about her failures. About struggling to feed her kids. About potentially losing their school placement. He was going to fire her in front of everyone. She reached the podium, her hands trembling. Ethan handed her the folder, and she took it with shaking fingers. Open it, he said gently. Maria's vision blurred with tears she was trying to hold back. She opened the folder with fumbling hands. Inside was a letter on official Summit Restaurant Group letterhead. She blinked, trying to focus on the words through her panic. Dear Maria Gutierrez, effective immediately, you have been enrolled in the Summit Employee Children Education Fund. She read further, her eyes moving faster across the page even as her brain struggled to comprehend what she was seeing. Full tuition coverage for both children at St. Augustine Elementary, including school supplies, meal programs, and extracurricular activities. Coverage guaranteed for the next 3 years, renewable based on continued employment. Maria's hands started shaking so hard she nearly dropped the folder. What? What is this? Her voice came out as a whisper. It's a promise, Ethan said. Your kid's tuition is paid. All of it. For the next 3 years. You will never have to choose between feeding yourself and keeping them in school again. The words didn't make sense. Couldn't make sense. But I can't. This is. Maria couldn't form a complete sentence. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I don't understand. You don't have to understand right now. You just have to know it's real. Your children are staying in school, Maria. That's done. That's handled. You can breathe now. Something broke inside her chest. 7 years of holding everything together, of being strong, of sacrificing and struggling and never complaining, it all came crashing down at once. Maria covered her face with her hands and sobbed. Not quiet, dignified tears. Full, body-shaking sobs that came from somewhere deep and wounded and exhausted. Ethan's hand touched her shoulder gently. It's okay. You're okay now. I don't have to choose anymore, she whispered through her tears. I don't have to choose between food and school anymore. Never again. The room was dead silent except for Maria's crying. And then, slowly, people started to stand. Patricia first, then James, then Marcus. One by one, the entire staff rose to their feet. Someone started clapping. Then everyone was clapping, and Maria looked up through her tears to see her coworkers, her friends, applauding. Not for the CEO. For her. Supporting her. Celebrating with her. She wiped her face with her sleeve, trying to pull herself together, but the tears wouldn't stop. Ethan waited until the applause quieted before speaking again. Maria isn't the only one, he said, his voice carrying across the room. The Employee Children Education Fund I'm announcing today applies to every single person working for Summit Restaurant Group. Every location. Every employee. Shocked murmurs rippled through the crowd. If you have children in school, elementary, middle, high school, even college, their tuition is now covered. 100%. Along with school supplies, meal programs, and reasonable extracurricular expenses. This starts immediately. No waiting period. No probationary requirements. If you work here, your kid's education is handled. James stood up from his seat, his voice shaking. All of it? The whole tuition? All of it. Patricia's hand went to her mouth. Even private schools? Any accredited school your children attend. Public, private, charter, religious, doesn't matter. If it's a legitimate educational institution, we'll cover it. Marcus stood slowly, his voice barely audible. College too? College too. Technical schools, community colleges, four-year universities. We'll work with each family individually to determine reasonable coverage limits, but yes, if your child is pursuing education, we're going to support that. The room erupted. People were crying, hugging each other, laughing in disbelief. Years of anxiety and impossible decisions suddenly lifted. The weight they'd all been carrying, alone, silently, desperately, suddenly shared. Ethan raised his voice to be heard over the emotion. I know some of you are thinking this sounds too good to be true. That there's got to be a catch. There isn't. The only requirement is that you remain employed here. Keep showing up. Keep working. That's it. How is this even possible? James called out. How can the company afford this? Last quarter, Summit Restaurant Group made $42 million in profit. We're opening 3 new locations this year. We have the money. We've always had the money. Ethan's voice hardened slightly. What we didn't have was the right priorities. That changes today. He picked up the stack of folders from the cart. Everyone who has children in school, these folders have your individual details. Pick them up before you leave today. For those who don't have children, don't think I've forgotten you. We're also implementing immediate wage increases across the board and improving healthcare coverage. Those details will be distributed by the end of the week. Daniel stood up in the back row, tears streaming down his face. Why are you doing this? Ethan was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. Because my father taught me that success isn't measured by profit margins. It's measured by the lives you improve. And I've spent too long measuring the wrong things. I'm not going to let that continue. He looked around the room at faces transformed by hope. You show up every day. You work hard. You sacrifice for your families. You deserve a company that sacrifices for you too. So that's what we're going to be from now on. Not a place where you struggle to survive, but a place where you can actually build a life. Maria walked back to her seat in a daze, clutching the folder like it might disappear if she let go. Patricia grabbed her hand and squeezed it tight. Around them, people were embracing, crying, laughing, all the emotions pouring out at once. Thank you. Someone shouted from the back. Then everyone was saying it. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Ethan shook his head. Don't thank me. Just live better. Eat lunch. Sleep at night without worrying. Watch your kids succeed. That's all the thanks I need. 1 week later, Ethan stood in the parking lot of St. Augustine Elementary, watching a scene he'd never forget. The morning sun cast long shadows across the schoolyard as children poured out of a yellow bus, each one carrying a brand new backpack. Inside those backpacks, fresh notebooks, pens, calculators, art supplies, everything they need for the semester. All provided by the Employee Children Education Fund. Ethan had personally delivered the school supplies that morning, working with the principal to ensure every child of every Summit employee received what they needed. No forms to fill out. No hoops to jump through. Just help, given freely. He spotted Maria immediately. She stood near the school entrance, watching her 2 children, Sophia and Miguel, run across the playground with their friends. Both wore new uniforms that actually fit properly. Both carried those new backpacks with visible pride. Maria looked different. The exhaustion that had carved lines into her face just a week ago had softened. She stood straighter. Smiled easier. Like someone who'd been holding her breath for years and could finally exhale. Ethan approached slowly, not wanting to intrude on the moment. Mr. Ward. Maria noticed him and smiled. A real smile that reached her eyes. I didn't expect to see you here. I wanted to see it for myself. Make sure everything worked smoothly. It's more than smooth. It's... She trailed off, shaking her head. I keep waiting to wake up. For this to be a dream. It's not a dream. I know. Logically, I know. But it's hard to believe something this good actually happened. She watched her kids playing, her voice soft. This morning, Sophia asked me if she could join the art club at school. She's never asked for anything like that before because she knew it cost extra. But today she asked, and I got to say yes. Her voice cracked on the last word. I got to say yes, Mr. Ward. Do you know how that feels? To not have to tell your child maybe next year or we can't afford it? To just say yes? Ethan's throat felt tight. That's what this was supposed to be about. Saying yes instead of no. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the children play. Other parents started arriving. Ethan recognized several faces from the restaurant. Daniel's daughter. Patricia's son. James's 2 kids. Word had spread through the parent community about what Summit Restaurant Group had done. Other parents looked at the Summit employees with something between admiration and envy, not bitter envy, but the wistful kind. The kind that said, I wish my employer cared like that. Mr. Ward! A small voice called out. Ethan turned to see Sophia running toward him, her new backpack bouncing against her shoulders. She was 8 years old, with her mother's dark hair and bright, intelligent eyes. She crashed into him with a hug that nearly knocked him backward. Thank you for helping my mom smile again, she said, her face pressed against his suit jacket. She cries less now. Happy crying is okay, but she was doing the sad kind before. I like happy crying better. Ethan crouched down to her level, his vision blurring slightly. Your mom is one of the strongest people I've ever met. She's been taking care of you because she loves you very much. I know. That's why I'm going to study really hard and become a doctor. So I can take care of her when she's old. I think you'll make an excellent doctor. Sophia beamed, then ran back to join her brother on the playground. Maria wiped tears from her eyes, the happy kind, just like Sophia said. She's been talking about being a doctor since she was 5. I never thought. I was so afraid she'd have to give up that dream because I couldn't afford to keep her in school. She's not giving up anything. None of them are. The school bell rang, and children started lining up to go inside. Sophia and Miguel waved to their mother one last time before disappearing through the doors. Maria turned to Ethan. What you did last week, the announcement, the fund, all of it, it saved more than just my kids' education. It saved me. I was drowning, and I didn't even realize how close I was to going under completely. You're not drowning anymore. None of you are. No. We're not. She smiled. And people have noticed. We had 17 applications for kitchen positions yesterday. Good applicants. Experienced people who heard about what you did and want to work for a company that actually cares. Ethan raised his eyebrows. 17? In one day? The word is spreading. Turns out when you treat employees like human beings, everyone wants to work for you. She glanced at her watch. I should get to work. I'm covering the lunch shift today. Are you eating lunch today? Ethan asked pointedly. Maria laughed, a sound he'd never heard from her before. Light. Genuine. Free. Yes, Mr. Ward. I'm eating lunch today. Every day, actually. Because I can finally afford to. She started toward her car, then paused and looked back. You kept your promise. Whatever you said to your father, you kept it. I hope he'd be proud. She walked away before Ethan could respond, leaving him standing alone in the parking lot with tears in his eyes. His father would be proud. He was sure of that now. 2 hours later, Ethan sat in the restaurant's dining room during the lunch rush. But he wasn't in his office reviewing spreadsheets. He was at a table with Maria, James, Patricia, Marcus, and Daniel, eating lunch together like equals. Because that's what they were. The restaurant hummed with energy around them. Every table was full. The kitchen staff moved with efficiency, and something that hadn't been there before, happiness. Maria bit into her sandwich, actually eating it, not packing it away, and smiled. No one was skipping meals anymore. Not ever again. Ethan looked around at the people who'd taught him what leadership really meant, and for the first time in years, he felt like he'd finally built something that mattered. Not an empire. A family.